What's going on, guys? That last podcast did pretty well, so I figured I would do another one here on a Sunday, do another Sunday conversation podcast. And I posted a question on the community tab of my YouTube homepage around what does it cost to build a guitar body? And I got 8 questions that I'm going to sort of answer and then sort of ramble on as well in terms of what it costs to do a guitar. For me, I always wanted to build a guitar, take a piece of wood and cut it, route it, shape it into the shape of a guitar. That was something I had inside of me. I had wanted to do it since I was 16, and no kit or anything was ever going to satisfy sort of that need to build something. It is my sort of form of self-therapy. I sit at a computer all day and do data analytics and numbers, and for me, building guitar is an escape from that. I also have 3 kids and a wife, and it's always nice to get 20 minutes to just sort of clear my head and experiment and do things. And really, it's a way just for me to kind of get out of my life and sort of disappear into guitars. At times, that becomes overwhelming and all-consuming, and I have to learn to pull it back and, really focus on what I want to do. So wanted to talk about the costs of building a guitar. This is the question that I probably get the most on my YouTube channel, across all videos, across all platforms, Instagram, YouTube, whatever. And probably the first question I want to answer was, what does it cost, sort of flatline? And it really depends on what you want to put into it. And I'll elaborate here. So if you want to build guitar bodies, you need some basic tools. You cannot really do it with hand tools. Yes, you can, but it's just not as pleasurable cutting a guitar body with a hacksaw and going around the corners. I've done that. It's terrible. A basic set of tools you need to build a guitar body are a bandsaw. I have a Craftsman 10-inch bandsaw that I've been using for years. It's perfect for curves. It's perfect for doing trims. It's a great tool. It's about $199. And then I have a Craftsman table router with a Craftsman router and then a long 2-inch bit. And that's how I route out the sides and do some other work with it. You can take that router, pull it out, and use it then as a plunge router on your template. And if you're just building guitar bodies and you get a top bearing bit, that's all you really need, because then you can use sandpaper and a round over bit or just sand it by hand, and you can build a guitar body relatively cheap. When I first started, I was building guitar bodies with templates, and I got into a pretty good process. I was doing bodies for dealers as sort of just backstock, and I got into it and kept going, and every dollar I made I reinvested into my shop. And that's why you see such a beautiful, wonderful shop, is because every dollar I made 15, 20 years ago, I poured back into my shop. I was also pretty lucky that my father worked for Ace Hardware, and he got a lot of sample tools that I got to keep. They also had some charity auctions, and he would buy some stuff from me. I also worked at Sears for 7 years, and I kind of knew what was coming and what was going, and we had a sample store. I could buy samples there. And then my grandfather was a woodworker, so not only did I get his wood and some of his basic tools when he died, I had a pretty good base to start. If you're going to get into guitar building and you have nothing, it's going to cost you $300 to $400 to get going. I would recommend you get a bandsaw, a router, table router, somehow, and go down that path and start building guitar bodies. It really depends on how many you want to build. And if you only want to build one guitar body, I would say go with a kit. It doesn't make any sense to buy a whole bunch of tools, make one body, then be like, I'm done. If you're going to try and acquire tools, go to pawn shops, look on eBay, go on Craigslist. That's the best way to start building up your tool assortment. Pawn shops always have stolen tools or whatever, and you're going to put a little bit of money into it, and you're going to waste your money anyway on certain things. So if you waste $50 on a router, Sears Craftsman routers are usually between $59, I think $79. That's a pretty decent tool. I think Home Depot has some Ryobi stuff that's okay. Um, I have that DeWalt 621 router, which is my favorite router of all time. And if I didn't have that router, I probably wouldn't be making as many guitar buddies as I can. But the basic set of tools you need are a bandsaw. You can't really cut out a 2-inch guitar body on a jigsaw. I've tried it. You'll break off the arm. It doesn't work. The bandsaw is the greatest thing. You can also sort of buy your pre-made bodies and veneer the tops and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of different options to get into guitar building. You don't have to get in and start buying the tools. You can buy a kit, veneer the kit, and stain the kit, and you've got sort of a customized body. I did a veneer top on a piece of, I think, an alder body years ago in one of my videos, and that's a different way to add and take away. Like I said, for me, guitar building was about building a guitar and expanding from there. Building necks is significantly more difficult. That is something that requires skills and fretting. Anybody can build a guitar body, and that fretboard is sort of the golden precision. If one fret is off, guitar's not going to play. Pawn shops are a great way to get a bunch of parts, a bunch of things together, and you can swap them out. You can take a neck, build a new body, take the body, build a new neck. It's a sort of cheap way to just convert and play. That's the big thing. That was one of the questions I have here is, how much of what I'm doing is experimentation? And I'd say a lot of it is experimentation. A lot of what I'm doing I haven't done before. I've eaten guitar bodies. I've thrown stuff out. I've got a whole bunch of mistakes in the basement that I didn't even pull out in the mistake video I did. But there's a lot of experimentation. You want to keep your costs low. You don't want to buy a whole bunch of equipment if you're not so sure. Like I said, for me, I always knew I wanted to do this, so I continued to invest, and every dollar I got, I invested. I got really serious when my other grandfather died. He gave me a little bit of money, and I bought my big bandsaw. I'd actually bought 4 bandsaws before I got to the Laguna HD. I had a, the Delta 14-inch. And then I moved up to the Rikon 18-inch. And then I bought a resaw machine. I think there was a Makita resaw machine with like a 2.5-inch blade. I had that, and that machine wasn't great. And then finally I needed a resaw machine, which was the Laguna. I used that Laguna then to resaw lumber and resell it and make some money on that. So I'd buy a billet, resaw one piece. It would also pay for that other piece. So it was kind of like a way to just sort of build up into some money. But don't go out and buy a whole set of tools from Grizzly if you're not sure you want to do this. Start with a body, make a body or two. You like it, go ahead and buy some more tools. It's a process. It's not like you're going to wake up one morning and be like, I'm going to be a guitar builder and I'm going to be awesome at it. It's going to take some time. It's going to take a little bit of time and energy to get there. So, like I said earlier, $5-ish, $100 to get going. By the time you get some bits, by the time you get some basic tools, buy some sandpaper, that's sort of the baseline. That sort of $500 then comes down significantly as you build more bodies. So you just have to buy the lumber, you got the tools. $500 over 4 or 5 bodies isn't that big of a deal. So that's sort of the basic needs for the tools. As you become more sort of product oriented and productionalized, you can just start pouring money out there. I experimented with a lot of pro tools that I didn't like. I bought a 15-inch planer, I sold it. Bought another 15-inch planer, and I sold that. I just didn't need that tool. I bought a shaper. I bought a Grizzly shaper with that spiral cutter bit. Didn't need that. Maybe lost a little bit of money on all of that stuff. I turned through bandsaws. I turned through a bunch of routers. All in $20,000 to $30,000 maybe in my shop. I had a huge pin router at one point. That Italian pin router that was $2,000. I had to rent a truck to move that thing. It's too big for what I was doing. So that sounds about right. It just depends on, where I'm at now versus where I was. I think when I was younger, I burned through a ton of tools. I burned through a ton of things because I didn't know what I wanted to do. The shop I have now was perfect for what I got, and I'm probably smaller in shop space and size than I was earlier on. I had a table saw. I don't have a table saw anymore. I've learned to make most of my cuts on my bandsaw and my joiner. Really just think about what do you want to do. You can buy a body blank that is 14 by 20. You can route cut. If you start getting into higher sort of complex things, like you want to create a body blank from 2 pieces of wood, you're going to need a joiner. Craftsman joiner is going to run anywhere between $199 to $399. You can get a hand tool as well to, plane it and get it flat and glue it. You're going to need some clamps. You're going to need 2 parallel clamps to glue the body blank. Those will also glue the top. Then you'll need a couple of side clamps, those Harbor Freight clamps, then to clamp that top down. You need some C-clamps to clamp the top to the body. What else? That's probably another 100, 150, depending on how much you're spending. Those parallel clamps get expensive. So that's doing a drop top without even sort of the cost of the lumber. So now you're, let's say, at $650-ish. If you're going to start layering in sort of another piece to the guitar building, we might as well just go to necks. The important thing with the neck is the precision of that fretboard. Like I said, you're going to need a fret press. You're going to need a slotting jig of some sort. You're going to need frets, end nippers, fret files, fret recrowners. Then you're going to have to cut a nut, and you'll need nut files. I would say all of that stuff for a neck is probably another $650, to be quite honest. Once you buy all that stuff, you can do a lot more work, but it sort of builds onto itself. I've got a whole plethora of tools for necks, and I think I've got a pretty consistent setup that I use. If you're going to round the radius of the fretboard, you need the beam. Those beams are a minimum $100. I have 3 of them. So depending on what you're building, what you're making, my big piece of advice for you guys is to start with a Tele or a Strat, then work your way up into more complicated instruments. You start building a Les Paul, you're going to make a gazillion mistakes, different construction technique, different levels of precision, and it's not going to work. Start with Strats and Teles. Start with Teles, actually, because it's just one less thing to do the arm and belly cutoffs, one less tool. You can use a spoke shave to do those cutoffs, the belly and arm cutouts, and then use a file and sand it down. So I'd say sort of basic cost to building a guitar, maybe $1,000, $1,200, depending on where you're getting your tools. One of the questions was, if you don't buy from Stu Mac, where do you buy? You can go on AliExpress, eBay, Amazon, Philadelphia Luthier Supplies. I love finding the guys that are getting out of the business and buying up some of those used tools on the cheap. These tools aren't going to fall apart. You're not sort of banging away at anything, so you don't need to worry about used hand tools for guitar building. All that stuff is pretty good. I've also made a bunch of tools for fret leveling for myself. I've taken pieces of oak, ran them through the joiner, and then used those to level the frets. That's how I'm leveling all of my frets now. I don't even use the $70 beam I bought. It was too long. I've got sort of 3 different lengths that do what I want it to do relatively quickly. So look on eBay for used parts. I think that's the best way. All right, what else? So here, how much would you spend to build something passable quality-wise, say a mid-level Strat or Tele? I still think it's about $1,000 in terms of tools to get there. If you get some alder and some maple, you can build a pretty nice guitar in your house, depending on how you are with finishing, for maybe $700-800. depending on how cheap you go, depending on the material, what you're looking for. That's probably the cheapest you get in terms of something passable from scratch. That doesn't include all the mistakes you'll make. But that's probably what I'd say in my head. That's from CC Chicken. Ahmed was talking about basic cost of machines. I'd say about $1,000. I bought a Tundros Angeles dies, alternatives for StewMac. I put that out there. Bandit Keith of Dual Monsters. Have you ever used all the extra parts you have laying around to just build hardware, pick up wiring? I have a ton of stuff sitting around, and I could probably make 10 guitars from it, with the bodies and the necks that I have. Just haven't done that. No one wants to buy those guitars. That's why I did a lot of giveaways for my 10-year. People want something specific. The Warmouth or the USA Custom guitars, for some reason, it's not like making your own guitar sort of custom build. Everyone has the parts casters. Parts casters don't sell very well. I've had this walnut telly for a year. It is unbelievably awesome. It's got a scratch. I don't want to sand it down. I don't want to work on it anymore. I'm sick of it. It's $1,200 alone. This would be a significant guitar, but it's a parts caster, and even though it's beautiful, it hasn't sold, which drives me nuts. I built it for myself, and then I said, oh, let's get rid of it, and I can't get rid of it. So those parts casters guitars won't sell. You're better off just sort of parting things out or looking for guys selling those guitars and just buying those. You're much better off going down that path. Michael Crosby asked, how much is the active experimentation? I'll expand on that a little bit. I would say 50-50. When I was younger, it was probably 25-75, and 75 being experimentation. Get used to making mistakes, get used to throwing away stuff, get used to eating it. Everyone was so pissed off about Gibson throwing away those Firebirds, and they should have given away to charity, but they didn't sell. They've been sitting on them for years. They're in bankruptcy. They're going to take the write-off, and they're a embarrassment to Harry. And so there's a lot of people, a lot of manufacturers that throw stuff out like that. And as guys who want to build from those, it drives me nuts. The ES video where they destroyed those guitars, I almost lost it. ES guitars are probably some of the most complicated guitars to make in terms of bending the sides and molding that top. When he stepped on those necks, I was like, oh my God. The amount of tooling that goes into those guitars is significant. So for them to sort of just throw them out was terrible. That was sort of a rant. Sorry. What is the least amount of money you spent on building a good guitar? If you have the tools, $300-400. If you don't have the tools, like I said, save $700-800. Warmouth is a great alternative to building your own neck. Building a neck is the most expensive piece. Go find a used Warmouth neck, learn how to do a fret cleanup, and you've got kind of what you want for relatively cheap. And anybody can build bodies, like I said. Bodies are, for me, the way I got started. And building a body is relatively easy. So those are some of the basic questions I had on the costs of building guitars. I didn't really go through training. I did this all myself. All the videos, all the learnings I had. I wasted a decent amount of money. My wife's not home, so she can't actually hear me say this. But I made a lot of mistakes. I bought some of the wrong tools. I lost money on some of those tools when I went to sell them. I tried to sell some parts casters. They didn't sell very well. When I was one of the first guys on eBay, I was selling guitar bodies for $300 to $500. I was doing those stained burl tops with an alder back, and I was putting Troy on them, and nobody was doing that custom work on eBay, and I was making some significant money. And then a bunch of other people got on eBay, and then I lost that market, economy crashed, and all that business sort of dried up. And I had to continue to make guitars because I had all this time and money invested in the tools and the equipment. So, other question I had as I'm looking at it was about kits, and what do I think of kits, and would I get started on kits? I think the biggest thing for me with kits is they're all slightly crappy. And what I mean by that is the Chinese are notorious for using wet wood on guitar necks. And once you get that neck and string it up, it may bend, it may warp, it may twist. The fret ends will stick out once that wood dries a little bit more. They don't process the wood the same, and as it comes over, it changes. And they usually don't dry to the same humidity as, let's say, a guy here in Michigan or in Wisconsin, from where I get some of my wood. And so kits are hit or miss. The solo kits are pretty good. The Albatross kits are pretty good. The kit I'm working on with Brad for this challenge, I've been pretty happy with it. I can't complain. Wasn't too expensive for the price point. The pickups are usually what is the killer piece of the guitars. Electronics, not so much. Electronics are all sort of the same in terms of pots and switches, but if you get bad pickups that aren't wired properly, it can be a mess. Kits are a really good way for you just to experiment, and like what Brad and I are doing with painting them, you can have fun. Like I said earlier, I've always wanted to build a guitar body. I wanted to build my own guitars. I wanted to do that. That's why I got into this. For me, a kit was never sort of in my vocabulary. If you just want to put something together and paint it, like a model, go ahead, get the kit. But I think most of the guys I'm talking to here want to build something. And the couple of girls that are watching, I want to build something. That's my therapy, like I said earlier in the video, is to build. So we're about 20-ish minutes here. I think this has been helpful for you guys, just sort of talking through my process of how I've gotten to the costs. As I've gotten into be a more serious builder, I found better places to buy wood. I buy more in bulk. I've got wholesalers I buy lumber from. I dry some of the lumber myself sometimes. I've learned to sort of outsource things as well as I get really busy, depending on what's happening. I have a bunch of luthiers that we all sort of work together at times, depending on who's doing what. So I've built some really good networks in this business. Be active on the forums, be active on Instagram, be active on YouTube. That's a way to grow your business. That's a way to kind of get out there. You make that first 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 guitars. You're not going to make any money on them. Make them for your friends, make them for your family. Get your costs back and be happy with that. Like I said, $1,000 to build your first guitar probably. You build 3 or 4 more, your costs come down significantly, and you now have a hobby, and you can get into it and make a little bit of money. So $800 to $1,000 to start. Sure, you can do things cheaper. There's other guys that are really insistent on jigsaws and sandpaper, and I'm not. I like my bandsaw. It's safe. It's fast. That's the other thing for me, is how much do you want to spend in time? And so I've bought a lot of specialized tools over the years to help speed up my process. I don't like setting up. I don't like changing router bits. It drives me nuts. It takes 4 or 5 minutes. I've only got 20 minutes. I want to grab the tool and go. So I have more tools in some aspects than other guys because I like having that stuff set up. I think that's all the questions that I had in my head that I wanted to kind of get to you guys in terms of how much it costs to build a guitar body, We're trying to get some interviews for these podcasts set up as well. Once the guys come back from tour, we'll be doing those once I figure out how to set these up. So that is my Sunday Conversation podcast on cost to build a guitar body. Hope you guys like it. Not 100% sure what the next topic will be. So if you've got a topic that you want me to cover, throw it down in the comments. I'll write it down and we'll continue these. Gotten some pretty good engagement as always. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video. And leave me questions if you have them. I always answer them. See ya. Bye.